If you have children, you've likely had this experience. When the child, say it's a boy, is about 5 years old, you have him with you in a crowd of people, perhaps at a shopping area. He's old enough that you don't feel you must hold his hand every minute because he usually stays close to you. But all of a sudden, he's gone. You look here, you look there, and he's not around any place. So you start asking the people with you, "Have you seen Johnny? He was right here, but suddenly he's gone." Then, a minute or two later, you find him. He probably had stopped to look in the window of a shop with puppies or candy or something else that interests him. At that point, you give him a little reminder that he's supposed to stay with you, and you hope this doesn't happen again. Whether that's happened to you or not, you can imagine what that parent must have been feeling. A similar story occurs in the Bible. When Jesus was 12 years old, he went with his parents to a Passover festival in Jerusalem. Thousands of people assembled annually for the feast of the Passover. When children were very young, they customarily stayed home with their mothers. At age 12, boys celebrated their bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah means a son of the covenant. It was a sort of dedication ceremony to remind young men that they must take their place in the religious life of the Jewish community. If you know any Jewish families, you are familiar with the words bar mitzvah. It's called bat mitzvah when it's a 12-year-old girl, but it's the same sort of thing. We don't know whether Jesus had his bar mitzvah or not. Still, age 12 would be the time to accompany the crowds to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. The festival lasted a week, then everybody would return home. As they were making their way home, suddenly Mary and Joseph looked around, and Jesus was not in sight. They just assumed he was with friends and relatives headed for Nazareth, their home, but he wasn't to be found even by nightfall. Well, of course, there was nothing to do but for them to turn around and head back to Jerusalem. They looked for 3 days, and you can imagine how frantic they would have been by this time. Eventually, they thought of looking in the temple courts where they celebrated the Passover, and there he was. But he wasn't alone. He was with the officials and teachers in the temple, listening to them and interacting with them. The Bible says, everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. For a 12-year-old, Jesus seemed to have an unusual perception of the religious laws and customs. The rabbinic way of teaching involved questions and answers. The rabbis or teachers would ask questions, and the young men would answer as best they could. The older men were surprised by Jesus' precise knowledge. If you had been Jesus' parents, what would you have done? Precisely what Mary and Joseph did. They listened to that conversation, and they were astonished. But before long, Mary couldn't resist asking, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Today, the first question would be, "Son, why didn't you call us on your cell phone?" But no, Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, no cell phones. Jesus' answer seemed to imply that he and they were living on different planets. "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Whoa, that would leave them shaking their heads for sure. So it's no surprise that the following words in the Bible were, "But they did not understand what he was saying to them." And I'm sure that's right. But of course, they knew that Jesus was a remarkable young man. And apparently, at the ripe age of 12, Jesus was becoming conscious of his own identity. Moreover, he was becoming deeply aware of a more extensive duty beyond his home of Nazareth. Even so, it is incredible to read the following words. "Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them." Jesus was beginning to register that more extraordinary things lay ahead. But he also knew that he was only 12 years old and still had a responsibility to obey his parents. The last verse in this section of the Bible reads, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and men." As we go further in these encounters with Jesus from week to week, we'll begin understanding what those words meant. In the meantime, give some thought to Jesus' response to his mother. Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?